Hey folks, David Stewart here. Today's topic, are single player games dead? I mean single player video games. Obviously single player like card games. Solitaire will never die, but single player video games, are they dead? And the answer is no. Now this comes up as a topic because I saw at least one person commenting this on another video game video I did, I think on Game Cycles with games as service type games like, World of Warcraft, etc. Are single player games dead? Is that dedicated single player experience going away? The answer is no. And I think if we look at the last console generation, the eighth generation of consoles, which is the PS4, Xbox One, and depending on how far back you want to go, the Wii U as well as the Nintendo Switch, I think if you're looking back over the past 7 years, the answer is no. Now, prior to that, going into the eighth console generation, people were really asking this question very seriously, and a lot of gamers were wondering if their single player experiences were going to either go away or they're going to be lessened by the inclusion of tacked on multiplayer. This was a huge trend at the end of the PS3, Xbox 360, I guess also Wii generation of consoles, where you had games like Call of Duty that just really exploded as far as popularity. Xbox Live and, of course, PlayStation's equivalent service were very popular for playing online games. And so looking into the PS4, Xbox One generation, they were going really heavily into online stuff and getting people to play online games. Online games were still very popular during that period. We had Destiny and Destiny 2, and Call of Duty still remains very, very popular. But if you look at the catalog, especially of PS4 games, PS4 being really, in a lot of ways, the winner of that console generation. It sold a lot of units and it had a huge number of exclusives. Those PlayStation exclusives tend to be single-player focused games. Single-player games maybe in their entirety with no multiplayer element at all. Because we had a lot of games coming into the PS4 where they were tacking on multiplayer, like Mass Effect 3, where they added in multiplayer and then even made people do multiplayer in order to unlock a different ending, which a lot of fans were really upset about because the first two Mass Effect games were exclusively single player. No one was interested in a Mass Effect multiplayer experience, or very few people were. But they tacked it on because they're like, everyone wants multiplayer now because Call of Duty is the hot thing. It just became this trend. So people were worried about these things going away. But since then, we've had a bunch of games that were basically single player focused. And the PlayStation 4 in particular, a lot of the big system sellers were single player games. You had games like Last of Us Part 2, of course. Not going to talk about whether that's a good game or not. You may not like it, but it is a single player game. Games like Sekiro, you had games like Neo, you had all of these single player games on the PS4 that were very, very popular. Of course, the Final Fantasy games, other than Final Fantasy 14, which is an MMO. So I think we've had kind of a separation out. We've had the games as services really their own thing, at least in the console space. You have your Destinies and stuff like that, and then you have really dedicated single player experiences where someone pops down $60, gets a complete game and plays through it. Now, there's DLC for a lot of those. Yeah, that exists, but they're still not going the full route of like having to do subscriptions or everything's multiplayer. You're losing your focused single player experience. So no, the single player experiences are still there. Of course, you have From Software games, Dark Souls games that are they're pretty much just single player games. Bloodborne. A lot of the system sellers for PS4 were single player games. And if you look at the Nintendo consoles, Nintendo's first-party catalog is almost entirely single-player or games which are meant to be played, say, in local co-op or local competitive play. So things like Smash Brothers. So there's online aspects to games like that, but they haven't gotten rid of the playing with people next to you thing, and really most of the games like, I don't know, Yoshi's Crafted World or Mario Odyssey, these are single-player games. These are really not online games at all. There's some extremely light online elements to, say, Mario Odyssey. But Nintendo has made their money and sold their systems, and now the Nintendo Switch is, I don't even know how many units it's sold, but it's been incredibly popular. It's really made its money pushing the single-player experience. really not to the exclusion of the multiplayer experience, but the multiplayer is really just such an afterthought for Nintendo, their online service. In fact, I think that's a complaint for a lot of people who are actually trying to play online games, is that it's not up to snuff compared to PlayStation Network and Xbox Live, which have been around longer and really have more robust systems and things like that. So I think we've had these things separate out into their categories and be a little bit different over the last console generation. But if you look back in time, and there's quite a few games that had that tacked on multiplayer, something like, I remember Spec Ops The Line. It's really meant to be a single player experience, but they tacked on multiplayer because they're like, it's a military shooter, there has to be multiplayer. And I think they even had a separate development team that's like, you're just going to make some multiplayer and it's going to be included because the publisher has to have multiplayer included. That was a big trend, and I think it's over now because I think the market has proven that they are not, that's not the exclusive thing. It gets even more, I think, bright for the future of multiplayer games when you consider indie games for all platforms. PC, whatever console platform you're looking at, even the Ouya or whatever. Indie games are, for the most part, single-player focused games, especially indie games that are released on Steam on the PC, and then maybe eventually make their way onto the various consoles. That's because in order to focus your product, if you're working with a small team, you really just have to pick one. Are you going to do a multiplayer game? And if you're going to do multiplayer, it increases the complexity of what you're doing because you're going to have to dealing with online multiplayer involves like client and server stuff that you have to code. Whereas if it's just a single player game that just runs on somebody's hardware, there's just not that much to do. It's a much simpler, more straightforward way to create the game. So most indie games are single player experiences. So when you incorporate indie games into that, wow, most games are still single player focused, and they're going to be single player focused for the future. But I think what makes it healthy is you have that AAA. There's still lots of AAA games that are just single player games. Put in the game and play it. And you have all that just gargantuan amount of indie games out there available on Steam and other platforms that people can play, which are entirely single player focused. And then, of course, one of the best selling consoles really in quite a while, the Nintendo Switch, which people are still having a hard time finding, really sells itself with its single-player catalog. Now, that's to say nothing about RPGs, JRPGs, Western RPGs, Skyrim, whatever it's going to be. All of those are single-player experiences, too. So the most popular games in the 8th generation of consoles and on the PC have been single-player experiences for the most part. And that's not to say anything bad about the multiplayer experiences. They make tons of money as well, but it's not like they're trying to infect the single player space and get rid of single player games to try to make more money. I think there's still plenty of market space for just buy the game, put in the disc, and play it. Now, you still might have to deal with DLC. DLC is still a thing for a lot of these games, but DLC to me is preferable to some of the other systems that are used for games as service models. And DLC is optional. You don't really have to buy it, or you could wait to buy the Game of the Year edition or the complete edition, whatever it's going to be. You can wait to buy that, and that'll have all the DLC included for a pretty low price. And looking back at the PS4, I'd say all of my top experiences on the PlayStation 4 were single-player experiences. And the worst experiences I had on the PS4, including Destiny, were multiplayer experiences. And now I play on the PC as well, but I think for console players, it's a more casual market than PC. And I think casual players are still very interested in being able to just buy a game and play it and be relaxed when they play the game. When you are playing a competitive multiplayer game, it can be a stressful experience. And one of the reasons they're popular, and I think they're very popular with young men, is it scratches an itch for achievement. To compete and beat other people makes you feel like you've achieved something. The reason I say young men is once you get older like me and you've achieved actual things in your real life and you're continuing to achieve real things in your real life, like I write books, I get a feeling of achievement when I finish a book and publish it, right? I don't need to then play League of Legends or something like that in order to feel like I've accomplished something or to feel like I've done something important or I've outcompeted somebody and I'm better than somebody. I don't have to feel any of that stuff in a game. In fact, I don't want it, because if I turn on a game, even an MMO, there's competitive aspects to that. Do I want to PvP in WoW or something? I don't usually want to PvP because that goes towards that. And what I want to usually do when I'm playing games is relax. So the console space for me, I've really enjoyed over the last couple years because I can walk away from my computer where I do my work, go into my living room, turn on the PlayStation, pop in, whatever game, Dragon Quest or something, pop in a game that is a single player experience, relax and play the game. Now, there's still gaming challenges associated with that, but it's not something where I feel like I'm really hyped up on the edge of my seat. Playing on a PC is a different experience because you're up high, sitting up, the screen's right in front of you versus laying on your couch seeing a larger screen. It makes you want to play a more relaxed experience. And so I think more casual players are in the console space than in the PC space. I'm sure there's casual PC players, but PC players tend to just be a little bit more intense and competitive. That just kind of goes with the territory. So especially if we're looking at the console side of it, single player games are still definitely going to be a go for the next console generation. We're going to see tons of games that are single player focused or are just entirely single player experiences. And even now, if I'm looking at the launch titles for the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5, there's a Spider-Man game, there's a Sackboy game and stuff. The main focus is the single player experience, not the multiplayer experience. So I think things are going to be pretty healthy from the get-go. I think we have a lot of market indicators that publishers are going to continue pursuing the single player experience in the future. So I think the future looks good for that. I think if you enjoy RPGs and JRPGs, I think there's going to be tons of great experiences in the future that are going to be available on console and PC. So thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe to my list just in case I get disappeared at the end of 2020, dbspress.com/list. And I think you get a free ebook for that. So have a great one, and I'll see you next time.